The bearish sentiment persisted on Wednesday as the all-share index closed in the red, marking a second consecutive day of losses on the NGX as investors continued to take profit. Overall, Nigerian stocks ended January strong, gaining 35.3%. However, the last 2 days saw a market correction that led to a 3.36% decline. Despite this, the market still closed significantly higher than it began in January. Well, let's take a look at the numbers now, beginning with the all-share index. And looking at the all-share index now, it lost 1.90%. That's the percentage change for the all-share index, and it's closed at 101,154.45. So let's move now to the market capitalization to see what happened. When you see the market capitalization, you notice that it's still the same when we talk about the percentage change, minus 1.90%, and the capitalization closed at 55.36 trillion naira. Now to the top gainers from yesterday's market. And then looking at the top gainers, Triple G making another appearance today, 3 naira 42 kobo after gaining 9.97%. And for PZ, 33 naira 10 kobo after gaining 9.97%. For Geregu closed 568 naira and then it gained 9.69 points. I mean, this is a stock that a lot of persons are really happy and excited about the numbers and a whole lot of things around it. With the dividend, you know, it said it's going to pay. Let's move on now to McNichols. McNichols closed 1 naira 59 kobo after gaining 9.66%, and Veritas Capital closed 60 kobo after gaining 9.09%. Now let's check out the stocks that lost yesterday. For the top losers yesterday, beginning with UPDC, 1 naira 80 kobo after losing 10%. Zenith Bank, 35 naira 10 kobo after losing 10%. Royal Exchange, of course, 72 kobo after losing 10%. We have May and Baker, 6 naira 21 kobo after losing 10%. And then for Sterling, 5 naira 67 kobo after losing 10%. Let's look at sectoral performance and see what the sectors are doing or what the sectors did yesterday. Beginning with the financial services, where you have banking and insurance. Well, banking lost a whopping 8.07%. That tells you that people are really taking profit. Investors are taking profit, and that talks about capital gains for them. And for insurance, we also see the same thing, minus 3.02%. Oil and gas, everybody is booking profit. That's what it seems like is happening right now. And then for oil and gas, minus 1.81%. For consumer goods, minus 1.82%. And for industrial goods, I mean, industrial goods, you can say that to a very large extent is still trying, even when it's joined the losing, you know, bandwagon and all of that. It's always minimal compared to other stocks. So we have minus 0.39% right there for the industrial goods. And this is the sectoral performance, you know, what we saw happen yesterday. And yesterday, that was, of course, the last day of January. And now it's February 1st. So investors are taking profits ahead of corporate earnings, with sector rotation providing buying opportunities, as we have seen even on the slide. Now the NGX is mixed as the market awaits corporate results. Some are already out, but particularly in the optimistic financial services sector. But we'll take a breather now before we bring you our first conversation for the day. Stay with us. In its bid to address speculation and hoarding in the foreign exchange market, the Central Bank of Nigeria has issued a new circular addressing suspected cases of excessive foreign currency speculation and hoarding from Nigerian banks. The new circular introduces a set of guidelines aimed at reducing the risks associated with these practices. And joining me to shed more light on this is Ayokunle Olubunmi, the head Financial Institutions Ratings, Augusto & Co. He joins me virtually. Hi, Ayokunle. Thank you for joining me today.
Good morning.
Good morning and happy new month.
I wish you the same.
All right. Well, the CBN has expressed its displeasure with the growth in foreign currency exposures of banks. My first question to you would be, should this bother the CBN, saying that banks also have a prerogative to hedge against currency risk in periods of severe, currency fluctuations like we have at this moment?
Thank you very much for that question. And I think, yes, to answer your question directly, yes, the CBN should be worried, because something that we need to realize is the bank are actually the intermediary when it gets to the FX market. They are the only dealers that are allowed to actually even play in the market. They act as the go-between between us, which we can think about as the demand size of the market, and the CBN and other participants that actually sell dollar into that particular market. Now, back to your other side of your question, which talks about the banks hedging their FX risk. Let's not forget that the CBN is saying that it must be square. That means their net open position must be zero. So it doesn't mean that you are not hedging against your risk. If you hedge against your risk, definitely that means you have a liability somewhere. in which you're actually using some asset to hedge it, such that at the end of the day, you must have a square position or a net zero position.
All right, so at what point can we actually say that the bank's foreign currency positions have actually become excessive?
Now, it depends on the state of the economy. Because let's think about it this way. Think about the banks as the intermediary, right? And a good analogy I can give to us is that think about the banks at the filling station, right? Assuming that you are trying to supply petrol into the market, right? You agree with me that what will determine the minimum stocks that the maximum stock that the filling station can actually hold depends on the state of the supply of petrol. In a period of scarcity, of course, the NNPC will want the filling station to actually have a low stock such that the ones that you have, you are dispensing it into the public. Same thing also with the banks also, right? In this period, given the challenges that we're having with the FX market, the CBN want them to actually hold very, very small position. And if you check over the years, you will notice that during period of FX prices, the CBN has always come to the market to try and even reduce the net open position of banks, right? I think in 2012, they made it to mid-20. There was a time it was 5%. There was a time it was actually even 10%, right? So to answer your question directly, it depends on the state of the economy. During the period of FX crisis, the CBN will want the banks to hold as very little position as possible because it may actually even encourage hoarding, right? If they are allowed to even hold a number of FX in their own position.
I get your drift now, but then there are prudential and other requirements that this circular actually proposes. For example, it's saying that let's begin with the prudential requirements now. That includes that the net open position, which you also alluded to, the limit of the raw foreign currency assets and liabilities, taking into cognizance both those on and off balance sheet should not exceed 20% short or 0% long of shareholders' funds unimpaired by losses using the gross aggregate method. Now, banks whose current net open position exceeds 20% short and 0% long of their shareholders' funds unimpaired by losses are required to bring them to the prudential limit by February 1, 2024. That is today. Now, that means they have 24 hours to do this. First, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I think something else that we need to appreciate is that before the CBN come out to some of this circular, let's not forget that they actually have the overall helicopter view of the economy, what is happening in the FX markets. And if you notice, since from Monday and yesterday, they've issued like 3 or 4 circulars that has to do with that market. That means they are seeing some anomalies in the markets, right? That they're actually even trying to correct. And I think they believe that thing needs to actually be addressed urgently. That's where we had it. Because also I was actually taken aback that how come it's actually effectively, right, that is telling them to sell off the excess position immediately. But I suspect that they are saying something that they are actually even trying to address. But having said that also, I believe that the banks that are, because to be fair to some banks, they might have some assets that are not as liquid that you can't even sell as fast as possible. I anticipate that some of them will actually even reach out to the CBN, ask for forbearance to be able to actually even meet the forbearance and time extension for them to actually meet this particular regulation.
Let me put this to you directly. Do you think that the banks could be culpable in one way or the other in, probably fueling speculation and even hoarding?
I don't think it's something that I think it's something that is possible, right? From the feelers we've been hearing in the market, right? It's something that's actually been happening. And the circular that we saw on Monday actually even made put some of the things that we've been hearing, saying that there are 2 checks, right, and what have you. And we've seen 1 or 2 instances of seen some sharp practices within the banking industry. So yes, I think some of the banks are actually even culpable in this. But at the same time, right, I don't think I will 100% blame the banks because the primary issue that we have here is this demand-supply imbalance in the markets, in the FX markets. Because if you don't have that particular situation, you won't have somebody hoarding, you won't have somebody speculating, right? So yes, to answer your question directly, yeah, some banks actually even might actually be culpable in this. And it's very important. And I think what the CBN is very timely. Because if the structure of the market is not actually even is not adequate, if you don't have the adequate structure, no matter the amount of FX you are sinking into the market, you might not see the full impact on the FX rate.
All right, let me butt in here. What do you think is the impact of this on, the foreign exchange market? A situation where, just like you have said, that there is that possibility that banks are hoarding and even encouraging or even practicing some form of speculation.
Yeah, okay. I think with the new circular, right, I think we might actually see a bit of sanity. And I think in the next couple of days, we will actually see the extent to which some banks have excess dollar cash, right? Because they have to unwind that particular position. And if the amount is significant, we'll actually feel the impact, at least in the official market, right? We'll actually see the full impact. And let me also add that we anticipate more circular, right, from the CBN to try and see how we can normalize what we're having in the FX markets. Because if you talk to treasurers and even those of us watching on the sideline, we realize that a lot of things that we have in the market, a lot of anomalies in the FX market. A lot of things needs to actually be done to bring sanity and need to cleanse the market and ensure that the market is functioning effectively and efficiently.
I must say that you sound confident in the CBN's, move in recent times. But then some are saying the CBN has probably come to its wit's end and is fighting hard to keep the naira afloat. Is that what you think?
Okay, I think there's some things that we need to first correct. First, what we have is we're not floating the exchange rate. What we have is what we call a managed float, in which you allow the forces of demand and supply to determine the exchange rate. However, you can intervene in the market, right? If you feel that the exchange rate is too high, you supply more dollars. And if you think that the exchange rate is too low, what happens? You can actually buy. So we don't have a free float of the naira. Let's first have that. At the same time also, I don't even think the CBN I think they're just even starting to even try and even really, really address the issues that we're having in the market. Let's not forget that this is the first circular from the new CBN governor, since he became the new CBN governor, that has to do with regulating the markets, right? What he has been doing over the last couple of months is to actually try and even clear the FX backlog, right? And that they've done that one to a significant extent. And I think some of us, we need to appreciate the extent of the issues that we have. It's a very, very bad situation that we are in. And like some people will say, we still need to actually go through some teething period before you even have the full result. I don't think they have gotten to their routine. And I think we expect to even see more circular and more directives.
All right. Thank you so much, Ayakunle Olubunmi. I mean, there's a whole lot to say on this, but we just have to leave it here. Thank you so much for your time on the show today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we have more for you. Stay with us. This is Business Edge. Nigeria's central bank said it had cleared the entire backlog of verified claims owed to foreign airlines whose payments had been blocked in the country. However, Airline Association IATA said another $700 million of owed money remained in Nigerian banks. Are they essentially saying the same thing in different ways, or is the use of the word verified the simple differentiator in this conversation? Joining me for more on this is Sean Mendes, International Aviation Consultant. Thank you, Sean, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's look at what's happening in the aviation sector, as you already know, looking at the payment that was made by CBN and all of that. So from the last payment by CBN to foreign airlines, how much do you think, the country actually owes in total? How much does the country owe foreign airlines in total?
Well, the exact figure is very hard to put a finger on because it's constantly changing. There are new ticket sales happening every day. So every time there is a payment, even if there's one payment a month, the amount of that payment needs to be sufficient to not just cover the ongoing sales, but also to make a dent into the past sales. Historically, for the last few years, we've seen that the number owed by Nigeria to foreign airlines tends to be in the range of about $700 to $800 million. So even though CBN has processed $60-something million this week and, I think $130-something million in the last couple of months, that in reality is just keeping pace with the actual ongoing sales of tickets over the peak period, rather than actually making a dent into the past due arrears. So it's the first steps, but I think there is a very long way to go before this issue is even close to being resolved.
All right, but looking at what the CBN said in its statement, it was saying that it had cleared the verified, backlog. What does that mean? Looking at that, that sounded like, okay, we've cleared everything. I mean, everything that's been verified has been cleared.
I think the CBN and the Nigerian government in general is suffering from a serious lack of credibility on this issue. We've seen for the last 2, 3, 5 years probably, all sorts of promises and statements that, oh, this will be done by the end of the month, or we've done this, oh, but really we didn't, and so forth. So I take a lot of it with a pinch of salt. And yes, I think the reality is that it comes down to semantics. What is the meaning of verified? Who is doing the verification? Where is this process being being held up? Is it being held up at CBN? Is it being held up with commercial banks who, obviously are pushing it to CBN for the approvals? Is it being held up with the airlines in terms of their documentation? But, my personal experience having run an airline and trying to get money out of Nigeria is that the delays usually tend to occur at the CBN level. CBN does not necessarily make the required amounts of Forex available at the appropriate time to the commercial banks, and consequently, the airlines are unable to access.
All right, so where does this actually leave us, and what is a more sustainable way to settle this so, we do not lose investors, people who would like to come do business in Nigeria because Nigeria has the market?
Well, I think Nigeria lost as a result of this. If you look in terms of the numbers of major African markets and the international travel recovery since COVID, Nigeria and South Africa are the two major markets which are still lagging 2019 figures, while the majority of Africa has actually exceeded figures. So, I think the Nigerian economy in general has been weak, but the aviation sector in particular, because of this problem of accessing foreign exchange, has seen airlines pull out of the market, airlines reduce service in the market, and airlines not expand in the market. So, you're seeing that with foreign airlines, but also with domestic airlines, because domestic airlines don't have access to the capital they require to make capital investments, to buy planes rather than relying on wet leases and short-term solutions rather than actual investments. So yes, I think the damage has already been done to Nigeria, and I think as far as Nigeria goes, there needs to be a serious change in the approach to how the aviation industry in general, not just airlines, but maintenance facilities, fuel suppliers, etc., are prioritized in terms of foreign exchange allocation in order to make sure that aviation is able to run smoothly.
Absolutely. Well, it is not only foreign airlines that need dollars, just like you've also said. Now, the local airlines, they also need dollars, seeing that the sector is highly dollarized. So talk to us. What has been your experience so far, trying to access Forex for your business?
Forex in Nigeria has been a challenge. This is not a recent thing. This has been the case for, periodically over decades, but more acutely in the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years. The reality is every airline that's operating in Nigeria is selling their tickets in Naira. And obviously, by treaty, the foreign airlines are entitled to change that back into hard currency to return it to the country where they're operating from. The problem is, due to the Forex shortages in Nigeria, this has not always been able to be settled promptly. And because of the constantly changing and in recent times devaluing exchange rates in Nigeria, the value of those Naira, what was worth $5 million 2 years ago is worth $1 and $2 million today. And airlines are winding up having to take a lot of losses from this.
Could that be the reason we are seeing a disparity between what the CBN had said it is paid and what IATA is saying? Maybe it's some of consideration, maybe airlines saying, you know what, we have to probably hedge against devaluation and peg this particular ticket at this particular amount. Is that what's happening?
It's quite possible. The unfortunate thing is that CBN is not very transparent in explaining these things. They've put out these statements saying, we have released this and we have cleared the backlog, and you can ask them to see the workings, but they are in all likelihood not going to release them, even to the people who have who have received that Forex. They will be told that this is how much you're getting. So There's definitely a difference in position between what the airlines think they are owed and what CBN thinks they are owed. How they've reached that difference in position, I think, is a formula that the CBN in particular, who have made the statement, are best placed to explain. But as far as IATA and the airlines are concerned, and I've spoken to multiple airlines in the last few days, since this statement has come out, and every one of them is like, well, if they've cleared the entire backlog, that doesn't include the X million dollars that we have sitting over there. So I'll definitely tell you that airlines do not believe this has been cleared. IATA doesn't believe this has been cleared, and I think the CBN is definitely unique in their belief that this matter is now resolved.
I like the way you put it. The CBN is unique in its belief that it is resolved. But still talking about Nigeria's aviation industry being highly dollarized, and we also know that does not serve anyone. But first, let me get your thoughts on why this is so. Why is it so dollarized, and what are your recommendations for de-dollarizing the aviation sector in Nigeria? If I can have that in a minute, I'll be grateful.
Well, aviation is a global business, and as a result, pretty much every cost in aviation is pegged to hard currency. There's very limited costs that you can de-dollarize, and those would be your local costs, like potentially labor and other activities. Even if you set up, say, a maintenance organization in Nigeria, you're still going to need to buy those spare parts from Airbus or Boeing or Embraer, and that's going to be in dollars. Even if you set up refineries in Nigeria, oil is a global commodity. You're not going to get it without some sort of subsidy, and we've seen how fuel subsidies have gone in Nigeria in the past. So I think there's a limit to how much you can de-dollarize the aviation sector without some sort of subsidies. And as a result, I think the solution is not going to be in de-dollarization. Certainly de-dollarize as much as you can. Don't rely on expat labor. Train more pilots, engineers, things like that locally, so you're not having to bring in foreigners and pay them in dollars. But it's never going to be an industry that you can go completely indigenous with, simply because of the global nature of it and the need to rely on supply chains that span the continents.
Thank you so much, Sean Mendes, for your time on the show today.
Thank you.
Once hailed as one of the world's best democracies, South Africa has now reached unprecedented levels of corruption, ranking it with other flawed democracies like Burkina Faso, Kosovo, and Vietnam. That's according to Transparency International's latest Corruption Perceptions Index, published this week. To put this in perspective, South Africa has fallen from 54th in 2010 during Jacob Zuma's presidency to 83rd in 2023 out of 180 countries. Professor Waldo Krugel, an economist at the Northwest University's campus, is here with me. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Now 54th in 2010, now 83rd in 2023 on the Corruption Perception Index. To what extent really has South Africa's reputation been damaged by this recent corruption ranking?
I think to a significant extent, but we should take a slightly more nuanced view of this index, and it helps to take a look at how it's compiled. So it takes data from a number of sources and puts together an index number where a larger number means less corrupt and a smaller number means more corrupt. Now, South Africa's score has fluctuated between 45 and 41 between 2010 and last year. And that means that the score itself hasn't changed that much, but the ranking has changed significantly. Not because corruption in South Africa has gotten that much worse, but because other countries have been improving their standing in this ranking. Now, this doesn't excuse what's been going on, because corruption is bad for investment and bad for economic growth.
All right, I like what you're saying. You're saying that, in essence, it's not like South Africa is doing worse, but what happened is that a lot of other countries have improved. So what stopped South Africa from improving if other countries have improved?
I think South Africa really has a legacy of this time of state capture and syndicates really operating with economic crimes, and solving those problems are not straightforward. It takes a lot of resources in both the investigation and the prosecution of this, and we really haven't been making much headway in this regard. Some of this is also reflected in South Africa's grey listing early last year, where like an international institution like the FATF said, well, we haven't been making enough progress, and ended up on this grey list.
All right. I think this particular one also, it's part of what you've said. You know, a few people think corruption under ex-president Jacob Zuma was more pronounced than during current President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, how effective has the current government been in addressing corruption compared to the previous administration? What are the things we're seeing?
I think there are many new plans and processes in place, but they haven't been particularly effective. And I think it's really difficult to address perceptions of this. So even if you are making headway in formulating new legislation or putting new processes in place or allocating more money to specific functions like prosecution, it's difficult to change the perception that there's a lot of corruption and that corruption has been persistent in a way. So you're trying your best to fight this wave of corruption, but it's going to take much more time. So in the meantime, I think ordinary South Africans and respondents to surveys like this feels like not much has happened and the levels are still too high.
Well, so let's talk about the potential economic and maybe even the social consequences of unchecked corruption in South Africa.
Oh, they are significant. I think we've really seen the consequences of this in the deterioration of the capacity and the efficacy of the state-owned enterprises. They've really been victims of this time of state capture. And we also see it in the very low investor confidence and the very low investment rates that we're experiencing. And that translates into very low economic growth. The moment that your economy is not growing, that means you're not creating jobs. It also means that the fiscal position and government's debt to GDP is more precarious. All of this filters through to really the most vulnerable in society who suffer from bad service delivery and slow economic growth at the same time. In that sense, corruption really is a disease that destroys society.
Absolutely. So how do we begin to change this perception? Because, I mean, it's important that this perception is changed. You have said something about the fact that South Africa didn't get worse. Some countries got better, but not everybody will sit to analyze and know what happened, what went wrong, how that maybe Cyril Ramaphosa is doing better than Zuma and all of that. Perception is important. So how do we begin to change this perception? What are the things South Africa needs to begin to do?
I think it really is a struggle across many different fronts. You need to really trumpet the wins that you do get at that very high level of legislative changes and more resources going towards investigation and prosecution. That helps. It creates this a positive feeling about the direction that things are going in. But then at a very low level, ordinary people, particularly business people, need to experience fewer cases of being asked for a bribe of some kind. And the only way that you can do that is to really crack down on these perpetrators. But that's quite difficult. Since the economy is experiencing really tough times, high interest rates, high price levels, I think there's a lot more small-scale corruption where officials and of many kinds ask for a little bribe somewhere along the side just to help them through their week or their month. They sort of think that's harmless, and they see the big perpetrators are not really being prosecuted. No one's ended up in jail following the Zondo Commission's recommendations. So you need to do the paperwork right, but then you also need to get to specific cases and start meting out the punishment for corruption.
Let's dig a little deeper into this particular report. Now, the top scorers in Africa are Seychelles, Cape Verde, and we have Botswana. They scored between 59 and 71%. And at rock bottom in Africa, we find Equatorial Guinea, South Sudan, and Somalia, with scores between 11 and 17. Now, what are the key differences between the top-ranked countries on the Corruption Perceptions Index and South Africa?
I think there are many differences in the fact that these top scorers are quite small economies. Compared to South Africa. Two of them are islands with very small open economies, and in the case of Botswana, it's very much a small economy with a very high, sort of strong resource base. So I think the South African situation is clearly more complicated, and we suffer these years of really organized state capture and corruption. But there's no denying these countries are doing things better. And a country like Botswana is allocating resources towards justice, prosecution, etc. And they've been doing better at this than South Africa. And we need to use this as an opportunity for some introspection. If we're falling relatively behind all our peer economies, that indicates how big the problem is.
Well, analysts like yourself have pointed to, government's poor performance in addressing the problem. You've talked about how that high-profile cases, are not followed through till the very end. So in a situation where the government is probably not willing or doesn't have the, political will to push through some of these cases, what options do people have? What options do South Africans have?
I think it's quite tricky for economists to speak about the politics of this. So whether it's a question of political will or a question of resources, I think it's probably a combination of both. On the resources side, it's clear that this problem is much bigger than the available resources. And during the so-called lost decade of the Zuma administration, there was really a hollowing out of many important institutions in terms of investigation and prosecution of corruption. And that capacity needs to be rebuilt over time with some money behind it. The fiscus is constrained at the moment, and getting back that human capital, literally the investigators, the prosecutors that need to do this job, is something that's going to take time.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Waldo Krugell, economist, Northwest University, for your time and for sharing your thoughts with us on Business Edge today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but that's it on this edition of Business Edge. You can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also go to our website, www.newscentral.africa. You can download our mobile app on Play Store and App Store. Till next time, I am Perpetua Fasomi Peter. Do enjoy the rest of the day. Bye for now.